Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar OFFICAL, your trusted destination for real-time Iraqi dinar intelligence, global currency shifts, and deep analysis that cuts through rumors, hype, and misinformation. And today's discussion is one of the most explosive topics shaking the currency world right now, because everywhere dinar holders are asking the same shocking question. Is the Iraqi dinar really just 15% away from the US dollar? And could a sudden revaluation shock be closer than anyone expected? So in this detailed breakdown, we are going to walk step by step through what this claim actually means, where the 15% narrative comes from, how the IQD is currently structured, what economic, political, and financial mechanisms would have to align for such a move to even be possible. Why misinformation spreads so fast in the dinar community, what recent developments inside Iraq are actually signaling, how international banking systems factor into potential rate change, and most importantly how viewers should think critically and responsibly about the future of the Iraqi dinar without falling into emotional traps or false expectations, because the IQD story has always been a long-term geopolitical and economic transformation, not a lottery ticket. And understanding that difference can protect you from disappointment, while keeping you prepared for legitimate opportunity. Now to understand the 15% away from the US dollar, claim we must first define what people are really saying because many assume this means one Iraqi dinar is about to equal 85 cents of one US dollar, which would imply a massive overnight wealth creation event. But in reality, such statements usually stem from misunderstanding exchange mechanics, confusing percentage-based adjustments with absolute value comparisons, or misinterpreting internal accounting rates used in government or oil settlement calculations. And at present the official exchange rate of the Iraqi dinar sits roughly around 1,300 IQD per USD depending on market fluctuations, which means that for the dinar to be within 15% of the dollar in literal value terms would require an appreciation of tens of thousands of percent. Not 15%, making that interpretation mathematically impossible in any normal economic scenario. So when you hear 15% away, what is usually being referenced is either a hypothetical managed float adjustment, a redenomination framework, or an internal valuation model used by economists to project purchasing power parity rather than nominal exchange value. And this distinction alone exposes why so many investors get emotionally whiplashed by sensational headlines, because the IQD conversation is filled with partial truths that sound explosive when stripped of context. Now let's talk about revaluation itself, because RV has become almost mythical in dinar circles. But in professional finance, a revaluation is simply a government-adjusted change to a currency's official exchange rate relative to others, often done under fixed or managed regimes, and Iraq currently operates under a managed float with strong central bank oversight, meaning the dinar is not freely floating like the dollar or euro but also not rigidly fixed, and any adjustment would be gradual, policy-driven, and carefully synchronized with reserves, inflation control, and trade balances, not a sudden shock that turns small holders into instant millionaires overnight. And historically, when countries with large money supplies and low per-unit value currencies strengthen, they often do so through redenomination, removing zeros from the currency while maintaining purchasing power rather than pure appreciation, because pure appreciation without removing excess money supply would destroy exports, spike inflation, and destabilize the economy. Which is exactly why professional economists dismiss overnight RV fantasies while still acknowledging Iraq's long-term strengthening trajectory. Now where does the excitement come from, and why are people talking again right now? The answer lies in a convergence of real developments being exaggerated beyond their actual meaning. Iraq has been making measurable progress in stabilizing its political environment, improving oil revenue management, strengthening foreign currency reserves which have crossed historically strong levels, modernizing its banking sector, expanding digital payments, and increasing compliance with international financial transparency standards. And these are not rumors, these are documented reforms, but reforms do not automatically equal a massive exchange rate leap. Instead, they build credibility, and credibility is what allows a currency to gradually gain strength and flexibility over time, meaning a slow appreciation, not a shock. And when influencers say 15% away, they may be referencing the idea that Iraq could adjust its official rate modestly, perhaps moving from around 1,300 to something like 1,100 or 1,200 per dollar over time if conditions allow, which would indeed be around a 10–15% policy shift, but that is not the same as being 15% away from parity with the US dollar. And understanding this protects you from false hope while still allowing you to track legitimate progress. Now let's discuss the Central Bank of Iraq, because no dinar conversation is complete without it. The CBI's primary mandate is price stability, currency stability, and maintaining confidence in the financial system, not enriching currency speculators, and every move they make is tied to inflation control, reserve sufficiency, and trade equilibrium. And when Iraq adjusted the dinar downward in 2020 to around 1,460 per dollar, it was done to stabilize government finances during oil price collapse, not because the dinar suddenly became weaker in real terms. and later adjustments toward 1,300 were aimed at controlling inflation and restoring confidence, which shows us something very important. The CBI uses the exchange rate as a policy tool, not as a wealth event, so any future upward movement would be incremental, tested, and reversible if conditions deteriorate, which again contradicts shock narratives. Now let's talk about oil because oil is Iraq's lifeline and the backbone of dinar valuation. Iraq holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and its production capacity continues to expand, generating massive dollar inflows that support foreign reserves. And strong reserves are essential for currency stability. But even oil-rich nations like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia maintain currency pegs or narrow bands rather than allowing dramatic appreciation, because a too strong currency hurts export competitiveness, and Iraq still imports a significant amount of goods, meaning a balanced approach is required. So while oil strength supports gradual dinar stability and potential appreciation, it does not justify extreme revaluation claims. Now let's address international banking and why SWIFT correspondent banking and compliance reforms matter so much. Iraq has been under intense scrutiny to prevent dollar smuggling, money laundering, and sanctions evasion, and the recent tightening of dollar auctions, increased transparency, and banking reforms are aimed at integrating Iraq more fully into the global financial system, which is a prerequisite for any currency flexibility. But again, integration leads to credibility, credibility leads to stability, and stability leads to slow appreciation. Not overnight parity. Now let's discuss the psychology of dinar speculation because this is where most people get trapped. Many holders entered this space years ago based on promises of instant wealth, repeated dates, and dramatic headlines. And when those dates passed, new narratives replaced old ones without accountability. And the human brain is wired to chase hope, especially when losses or long waiting periods are involved. So sensational claims like 15% away from the US dollar spread rapidly because they reignite emotional excitement. But seasoned investors understand that real wealth is built on patience, realistic expectations, and data-driven decisions, not viral hype. And this channel exists to help you separate fact from fantasy. Now let's examine purchasing power parity because this is another concept often misused. PPP compares what a unit of currency can buy domestically versus another currency internationally. And some analysts argue that the Iraqi dinar is undervalued relative to domestic purchasing power, which may be partially true, but PPP does not dictate exchange rates directly, especially in economies with capital controls, trade imbalances, or political risk. And many currencies remain undervalued for decades despite strong PPP metrics. So using PPP to claim imminent parity is misleading at best. Now let's talk about redenomination because this is the most likely long-term structural change Iraq could pursue. Redenomination removes zeros from the currency, simplifying accounting and improving public confidence, but it does not increase real wealth. If you hold 1,000 old dinars and redenomination removes 3 zeros, you would hold 1 new dinar with equivalent purchasing power, not a sudden increase. And many countries including Turkey have done this successfully, and Iraq has openly discussed this possibility in the past. But such a move would be carefully planned, publicly communicated, and gradual, not a surprise shock. Now let's address the role of the US dollar itself. The dollar remains the world's reserve currency, backed by deep financial markets, military power, and global trust. And no emerging market currency jumps anywhere near parity with the dollar without decades of structural development, diversified exports, and strong institutions. And even then parity is not a goal, stability is. So when someone claims the dinar is almost at the dollar, they are either misunderstanding economics or intentionally exaggerating. Now let's bring this back to what actually matters for dinar holders. The real opportunity in IQD lies not in fantasy exchange rates, but in long-term normalization, banking reform, and gradual strengthening that reflects Iraq's rebuilding process. If the dinar appreciates slowly over years as Iraq stabilizes, that is a legitimate macroeconomic story. But it will reward patience and scale, not impulsive speculation, and those who overextend financially chasing unrealistic outcomes often suffer the most, so responsible positioning. Realistic timelines and diversified thinking are essential. Now let's talk about media manipulation because this is another critical issue. Many YouTube channels, blogs, and social media accounts monetize excitement, not accuracy, and exaggerated thumbnails, countdown titles, and shock language generate clicks but rarely accountability. And when predictions fail, the narrative simply shifts to a new inside source. And this cycle has repeated for over a decade. Which should tell you something important. Credible financial analysis does not rely on secrecy, vague insiders, or emotional urgency. It relies on transparent data and slow-moving trends. Now let's look ahead realistically. What could happen in the next few years if reforms continue? Iraq could maintain a stable exchange rate, reduce black market spreads, gradually adjust its official rate to reflect improved fundamentals, expand digital banking, attract foreign investment, and possibly prepare for redenomination once inflation and institutional readiness allow. And each of these steps strengthens the dinar indirectly, but none of them support the idea of being 15% away from the US dollar in nominal terms. So as we close this deep analysis, remember this: the Iraqi dinar story is not dead. But it is not magical either. It is a slow, complex, politically sensitive economic transformation. And the real shock is not an overnight revaluation. The real shock is how many people still believe in impossible math because hope is louder than reality. And here on Iraqi Dinar OFFICAL, our mission is not to sell dreams but to build understanding, so stay informed, stay grounded, question every sensational claim, and focus on real indicators rather than viral hype, because the future of the dinar will be written by policy, discipline, and reform, not by headlines. And if you value truth over noise, make sure you stay connected with this channel for continued updates, analysis, and clarity in a world full of speculation.